Seminole oil book in these words. He said, "The Seminole country was ripe for a play after large Wilcox sand wells were found in the old Wewoka pool in 1925. Well, there were several major fields were found on this previously unsuspected Seminole uplift. Now, the Seminole City field was discovered by Indian Territory Illuminating Oil Company on March 7, 1926. This was the shallow zone. Their well flowed 1,000 barrels a day from the Hunton. The Wilcox sand was discovered by Amarada Petroleum in a well 1/4 of a mile east of the ITIO discovery well on July the 6th of 26. And then the R.F. Garland and the Independent Oil Company were drilling a well about a mile southwest at about this same time. And this well came in, as you recall, on July 16, 1926, flowing 1,500 barrels a day. Don't we wish we could find some of those today? Later, it made as much as 8,000 barrels per day. And this, in the words of your publisher, Milton Phillips, was what really started the big Seminole boom, the Fixico #1. This then is the historical heritage that we're commemorating today, the development of the massive Greater Seminole field, its contributions to the economy of the community, the state, and the nation. And those quotable quotes from the big 2-inch thick history of oil in the United States is our source of information. And I think our speaker here today will put some flesh on those outlines from a "I was here when" type of experience. I think here to introduce first, let me make some other introductions. May I take just a minute? Over to my left and your right is Jack Wettengill, Executive Director of the Oklahoma Historical Society. Would you hold your applause in the interest of time? You've been introduced to, we have Dean McGee, who is Chairman of Kerr McGee and our illustrious Governor, Dr. Warren Jensen, Vice President of the Oklahoma Petroleum Council and Vice President of Continental Operations in Ponca City. Earl Metcalf, Director of Historical Sites of the Oklahoma Historical Society. And I did not get the names of the others at the head table. Why don't you stand up and introduce yourselves? Okay. I want to, local dignitaries, we're glad to have you. We're real happy to have today, with us today, a man that we have worked with for many years. His name is Bill Willis. And many folks, when introduced initially to him, say, "Well, are you Bill Willis, the Speaker of the House?" And he says, "No, I'm Bill Willis, the chiseler." Now, he is the man from Granite, Oklahoma, who etched in Oklahoma granite the wonderful marker out there. And I haven't seen it, but I understand it's one of his best. So I know you will appreciate it. As you know, Milt Phillips is a member of the Oklahoma Historical Commission. The Oklahoma Petroleum Council Historical Committee, many of them are here, as is Jim Kim, who is the Executive Manager of the Oklahoma Petroleum Council. On the Historical Committee, Leslie Brooks, Luther Williams of Tulsa, Ty Dahlgren, and Bill Murray of Oklahoma City, and Phil Withrow of Seminole. And we're just real happy to have them. We're going to work them. They came down here to have fun, but we're going to work them and have a meeting of our Historical Committee. There no doubt are scores of people here who could add to Dean McGee's account of the Seminole boom, and I understand there will be some sort of recognition for them later on today. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Warren Jensen, Vice President, Oklahoma Petroleum Council, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, John. I'm sure and satisfied that our speaker today really doesn't need an introduction here where so many people know him, but it is my privilege and great pleasure to be here with you today and to have that honor. I think it is most appropriate for us to have as our main speaker a leader of the petroleum industry who is well acquainted with the history of the oil field that is being honored today. Born in Humboldt, Kansas, Dean A. McGee was graduated from the University of Kansas in 1926 with a bachelor's degree in mining engineering. He joined Phillips Petroleum Company in Bartlesville as a petroleum geologist and later was named chief geologist of the company. In 1937, he joined Kerr Oil Company, now Kerr McGee Corporation, as vice president in charge of production and exploration and was named executive vice president in 1942. He became a member of the board of directors in 1946 when the company's name was changed to Kerr McGee Oil Industries Incorporated. He became president and chief executive officer in 1954 and then was named chairman and chief executive officer in 1963. He is the recipient of more than 30 awards, citations, and honorary degrees. Among the most noteworthy are the Sidney Powers Award, the highest honor bestowed by the American Association of Petroleum Geologists, the National Conference of Christians and Jews 1961 National Brotherhood Citation, and the Outstanding Oklahoma Oilman Award presented by the Oklahoma Petroleum Council in 1970, which is the highest honor bestowed by the petroleum industry in Oklahoma. He has been inducted into the Oklahoma Hall of Fame and early this year became the first person to be awarded the Petroleum Distinguished Service Award at the Marlin Renaissance Ball in Ponca City. He has had more than a dozen articles published in trade publications on subjects ranging from petroleum geology to uranium supply and demand. Among his many business, civic, and professional activities, he is a director or trustee of more than 30 organizations. A few of them are the Midwest and Southwest Research Institutes, Oklahoma City University, the American Petroleum Institute, the Independent Petroleum Association, and the American Mining Congress. As a former resident of the Seminole area, he is well qualified to speak to us today on this special occasion. It is indeed a pleasure to present to you one of the outstanding citizens of Oklahoma and a national leader in the petroleum industry, Mr. Dean A. McGee.
Thank you, Warren, Governor Boren, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This is an occasion that undoubtedly stirs great memories in the minds of many of those here today. And it should, for what happened a mile east of Seminole 51 years ago, mark the beginning of one of the petroleum industry's most important, colorful, and interesting eras. When the Bob Garland and Independent Oil, Fixico 1 came in flowing 1,500 barrels a day from the Wilcox Sand, it set off one of the most talked about, written about, memorable and important oil booms in the history of the petroleum industry. It is certainly fitting that a historical marker be erected so that Oklahomans, as well as visitors to the state, will appreciate fully the role the greater Seminole oil field played in the development of not only Oklahoma, but the petroleum industry. I am also pleased to learn that an oil museum is to be established that will faithfully depict and preserve for posterity the drilling and production equipment and methods in use at that time. There are undoubtedly many people here today more qualified than I to talk about the challenges, the excitement, the escapades, and the tremendous accomplishments that were all a part of one of the greatest oil booms in the history of the industry. In the 1920s, Seminole and oil became synonymous in the minds of oil men. It is interesting to note that the sons of some of those who pioneered in the Seminole Fields have gone on to become leaders in the industry. When the Fixco came in, I was living in a bunkhouse on a lease a few miles north of what is now Borger, Texas. I was just out of college and working as a geologist for Phillips Petroleum Company. Regrettably, I missed the early part of the Seminole boom, but I did arrive when activity was about at its peak and experienced one of the most interesting periods of my life. When great wealth is suddenly created in an area where it did not previously exist, and when such things as roads, housing, transportation, services of all kinds, and an adequate local workforce are not in place, you have the explosive setting that produced the Seminole boom. The hectic pace of the boom and the drive of the operators to drill wells faster and produce them at the highest rate possible during most of the Seminole years was the result of the prevailing law in the oil industry, the law of capture. An operator owned whatever oil he could produce and sell, no matter if some of it came from the offsetting neighbor's lease. Consequently, everyone in the Seminole area was caught up in the excitement and challenge of the race to outdo his neighbors and competitors. Oil field hands worked hard and they played hard. Much has been written and many tall tales told about the difficulty and hardships confronted by those developing and producing the leases, as well as the lusty nightlife that accompanied the boom. The Fixco well and the rush to drill and produce that followed transformed Seminole almost overnight from a quiet town of 500 into a teeming, bustling oil center of 20,000 people. There is no single word to describe the boom at its height. Common traits included the mud-spattered face and clothes of drillers and oil field hands, the odd stare of the sightseer, the painted face of the streetwalker, the appraising eyes of the professional shakedown artist, the sweet scent of crude oil, sweaty mule teams, the odor of frying hamburgers, the chugging of steam-driven mud pumps, and the plumes of rising steam as boilers blew their safety valves, and accompanying it all, a profusion of pipe and supply yards. Seminole was a city of contrasts. Officials of oil companies rubbed elbows with oil field workers. New brick buildings hobnobbed with tents and packing box dwellings. Flashily dressed dance hall queens paraded across crowded streets. Respectable ladies kept off the streets as much as possible, especially at night. Seminole was called the gayest, maddest, rip-roaringest town that ever boasted a roughneck. One reporter wrote at the time, "The town got to you. It struck you the minute you pulled into town. At home you might have been a deacon or a straight-laced pedagogue, but 10 to 1 when you hit Seminole, you had to bust loose somehow. If it wasn't anything but yelling at someone across the street, turning your hat around backward, or chewing bubble gum." Sights common to Seminole's Main Street were board sidewalks, a sea of congested traffic, sidewalk shops with huge tables of merchandise, sidewalk cafes with long lines of customers waiting for a cup of coffee and a slab of pie, painted women trying to get through the everlasting mud. A good gauge of the town's vigorous pace was the railroad traffic. Daily carloads jumped from 50 to 150. 10 freight trains a day were rolling in and out of town. One express train, the King George Special, loaded about 10,000 barrels of crude oil daily at Seminole and raced off to the Imperial refineries at Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. The Seminole train station in August 1927 took in more than $1 million of receipts and surpassed Chicago as the busiest station in the world. The other side of the bazaar included sober, hard-working oil field men and their wives, eager high school graduates happy with their good jobs in stores, filling stations, and cafes, merchants striving to take care of the rush of customers, hotel and rooming house managers doing their best to meet the crisis of room shortages. Housing costs were inflated. Garages with cement floors and no windows rented for $50 to $60 a month. Duplexes and apartments with rugs on the floor brought $125 a month. Rooms rented on a per shift basis instead of by the day or week. Single bed prices ranged from 50 cents to $10 a night. Prices were quoted for so many hours of sleeping, with the understanding someone else would use the bed the other half of the day or for the next 8 hours. Perhaps fresh linen would be supplied, perhaps not. In the vernacular of the oil field at the time, this was commonly known as hotbedding. Bishop's Alley was the amusement center for the oil fields. Here at the north end of Main Street huddled a collection of dance halls, liquor dives, and taxi dance halls, where girls would more than likely pick a guy's pocket or turn him over to their shakedown boyfriend. Fights, knifings, and flying bullets were not uncommon in Bishop's Alley. In this quarter, the night resounded with the blare of dance bands and the din of leather-lunged street barkers, advertising shows as the peppiest, spiciest girl extravaganzas in the world. One Saturday night at the Midnight Rambles, the whole troupe was arrested because one of its peroxide blonde cuties decided to do a Sally Rand without a fan. To the great credit of Seminole, a responsible group of concerned men and women transformed the boomtown into one of Oklahoma's finest communities. Improvements came quietly and swiftly and turned the town away from growing chaos to solid, planned progress. It seems that everyone who went through the boom remembers first the mud. I do not know that more rain fell than normal in those years, but the heavy equipment passing over unpaved roads produced some stupendous mud holes. One of the favorite stories that was passed around in the oil fields was about a man standing on the boardwalk on Seminole's Main Street. He saw another man passing by in the street with just his head out of the mud. "Here," said the man on the boardwalk, "I'll give you a hand." The man, who was buried up to his neck in mud, replied, "Thanks, but I don't need help. I'm on horseback." We have a man working for us now who swears that as a boy living on a lease in Seminole during the boom, he stood at the top of Main Street and watched a wagon loaded with an oil field boiler disappear into a mud hole at the bottom of the hill. While the many interesting tales and the intense activity that centered in the city of Seminole, both business and otherwise, made the boom colorful and newsworthy, these things have largely been forgotten. What is remembered are the many important contributions Seminole made to advancing the industry's knowledge and practices in such areas as conservation, petroleum and reservoir engineering, drilling tools and methods, petroleum geology, and production techniques. The Fixico 1 blew in on July 16, 1926. In the first 3 months, it produced a total of 550,000 barrels of oil. The Seminole City field was developed rapidly. Only 7 months after the completion of Fixico, the field reached its peak, averaging 253,000 barrels of oil a day from 211 wells. Nowhere had drilling activity been more hectic. In less than 18 months, Seminole City yielded almost 55 million barrels of oil. It made history as the country's most prolific oil field and the leading producing pool of the greater Seminole Field. In 1927, the production of 136 million barrels from the greater Seminole Field accounted for 10% of the nation's total. But unfortunately, nationwide production exceeded demand by about 200,000 barrels per day that year. By late 1926, as the pipelines serving Seminole reached their capacity, and demand as well as price for Seminole oil softened, the operators began to look for a solution to the overproduction problem. Some of the operators meant to work out a plan to preserve the market by rationing or prorating oil production. In November 1926, an active proration era began in Oklahoma. The idea of proration was not new. It had been tried in the Pennsylvania fields before 1900 and in Cushing in 1914, but not on the scale or with the success that eventually evolved out of the Seminole experiment. The goal was to limit the Seminole district output to an amount that could be handled by existing pipelines. But new pipelines were built and new fields were put on production, adding to the glut. And this attempt at voluntarily limiting production broke down in early 1927. Nevertheless, the Seminole operators had for a short period shown that proration might work. The operators tried again, and in the spring of 1927, a group of producers employed Ray Collins to serve as proration umpire for the greater Seminole area. The new proration plan aimed at restricting the flow of wells on a percentage basis. Opponents of the plan cried price fixing. Collins in July 1927 petitioned the Oklahoma Corporation Commission to give him official status as umpire of Greater Seminole. On July 21, 1927, the Commission complied with Collins' request, thus placing a privately paid official in administrative control of the oil fields. This action merely gave a semblance of legality to the gentleman's proration agreement. Also, the corporation issued an order forbidding the drilling of unnecessary wells until August the 5th, 1927. No new wells were drilled during this period, but derricks were erected and tools moved into place. The instant the August deadline expired, drilling activity began anew. It appeared the effects of proration would be offset by a new production glut. During the first weeks of August, Seminole operators met with Collins and agreed on a fixed allowable not to exceed 450,000 barrels a day. Collins divided the total among the operators. The State Corporation Commission approved the agreement. Some operators objected, and litigation attacked the commission order. This became the pattern of proration from 1927 to 1929. Proration plans were worked out by the operators, who employed umpires to settle controversial questions. The plans were given the blessing of the state in the form of official orders. By 1929, Seminole operators had set an example for the rest of the nation by showing voluntary conservation was possible. Not all operators agreed to this or even practiced it. Nevertheless, in March of 1929, the output of crude in Greater Seminole had been curtailed by more than 120,000 barrels a day. On a national scale, the largest decrease in the daily average production of crude petroleum ever recorded during any week of the history of the oil industry occurred the first week of November 1929. The decline was a direct measure of Greater Seminole's influence on voluntary conservation practices. Based on knowledge and experience gained at Seminole, Oklahoma led the way in establishing workable conservation laws, the Interstate Oil Compact Commission, and equitable nationwide proration practices. While the concepts of petroleum engineering and its offshoot, reservoir engineering, had been slowly evolving for a decade or so before Seminole, It was the development of the greater Seminole area that gave the engineers an opportunity to test their theories. It was especially helpful to observe the effect of restricted flow on reservoir performance. For up to that time, wells had generally been produced at their maximum rates of flow. While the practical men in the field were reluctant to accept the advice of the young men with college degrees, a working relationship soon developed between these men and the petroleum engineers and geologists during the hectic days of Seminole, and both professions took giant forward strides. While the Fixico and many of the earlier discovery wells in the area were drilled with cable tools, it was a steam-driven rotary drilling rig that made history in Seminole. While the rotary method of drilling came into limited use before the discovery of the Spindletop field in 1901, its use was not widespread until the Seminole boom. Drilling in Seminole was highly competitive, and there were insistent demands for equipment that could drill holes and complete wells in a minimum of time. This resulted in the development of heavy and powerful equipment. The urge for more speed and faster well completions brought on the difficulties of crooked holes, drill pipe failures, and pointed up the need for better drilling fluids, better bits, drilling control instruments, and many other advancements. Heavy equipment and fast drilling were developed during the early part of the Seminole boom, and the improvement of equipment and drilling practices during the latter part. This period is regarded as the most productive in the history of the industry, so far as rotary drilling equipment and practices are concerned. Because fast drilling was expected, drillers put as much weight on the drill pipe as they could. As a result, Seminole became famous for crooked holes. There was one incident, which I believe actually happened, where a drilling well drilled into the hole of a producing well on an offsetting lease. The first well angle measuring device introduced at Seminole was the acid bottle. A small glass bottle was half filled with acid and run in the hole with the drill pipe. The acid would etch a ring on the bottle, and if the hole was off vertically, the angle could be measured with the tilt. Since the driller had to pull the drill pipe to retrieve the bottle, this meant lost drilling time. So the practice quite frequently, when no one was around, was to simply set the bottle on a bench in the doghouse and put some tilt into the etched ring to make it look authentic. Greater Seminole experienced the greatest drilling campaign in the history of the industry. By September 1929, the district was the nation's premier high-gravity oil field. Greater Seminole was actually a composite of many fields. It covered more than 4,000 acres of Seminole County and spilled over into neighboring counties. In the 10 years following Fixico number 1, Greater Seminole yielded more than $1 billion of crude oil, and you must remember that the price of oil was less than $2 a barrel then. It was in the oil patch where the true spirit of Greater Seminole prevailed. Much has been written about boom days in the town of Seminole, but not enough has been said about the people out in the field. Out on the rig was an excitement you could find nowhere else. Working conditions were pretty rough, but on the rig everybody was pulling together, hoping for a big well or a new discovery. There was no griping about having to work. There was no lying down on the job. The tempo of the work was exhausting. The drilling crews worked 12-hour shifts. The men who manned the rigs and produced the oil were responsible and knowledgeable. The driller, the roughneck, the tool pusher, the superintendent, all the workers in the field were great people. They generated a feeling of excitement, achievement, and competition. The enduring episode of Greater Seminole is the story of people creating wealth. This is why I think it is fitting to honor the field with a marker today, and in due time erect a museum to commemorate one of the most intensive human endeavors in the history of the petroleum industry. having been for a time a part of it all. I wish to thank you for permitting me to be a participant in today's historical dedication. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean McGee. I think we're all convinced now that you were there, and we appreciate your contributions to it. If you don't think, if you need any convincing, there's a guy over here, a gray-haired fellow over here by the name of Bill Payne, who can tell you a few things that would convince you that both of them were in Seminole. You talk about the muddy roads. They were created to a large degree by the day of the Model T. And our artist who drew the artwork for the marker says there are at least 30 Model Ts in that very small space of about this much on the marker. So if any of you want to confirm that, you go out there and count them. You have some instructions.
Thank you, John and Dean McGee. It's the custom at this time to ask the mayor to make a special presentation. Dean McGee, would you come back up, please?
Thank you, Don. Governor, ladies and gentlemen, this indeed is a very great day for Seminole. And for one, I'm sure most of you were also. I know I was very fascinated listening to Dean McGee tell us about Boom Day Seminole. But of course, as mayor, I'm obligated to say that we've come a long way. But on the other hand, some of the things he talked about sounded kind of appealing in the boom days. But ladies and gentlemen, I think that we have just heard an address by a giant in the energy field. We have just heard an address by one of the most important men in America. I had not had the privilege of meeting or even seeing Dean McGee until about 2 weeks ago. And on that occasion, 5 of us from Seminole thought that it might be appropriate if we traveled to Oklahoma City to meet Mr. McGee and let him know some of the things that we were planning on today's occasion. And although we knew he was a busy man, we did have an appointment for a few minutes. And early one morning, 5 of us were in the Kerr McGee building and going up the elevator. And I hadn't noticed, but a 6th person was riding up with us. And about halfway up, the 6th person says, "You folks might be coming to see me. I'm Dean McGee." We then went into his office, and the few minutes turned into an hour of reminiscing about Seminole and about boom days and about Mr. McGee's experience during that time. And as we were leaving the office, there were a large number of people, important-looking people I might add, who were waiting to see Mr. McGee, and I know their business was far more important than ours. And Mr. McGee said, "Please wait." And not only did he take us to the elevator, but he went downstairs in the concourse, in the tunnel, the Kerr McGee tunnel, and gave us a leisurely tour of photographs showing the history of Kerr McGee Oil Company. And I think the 5 of us, when we left Oklahoma City that day, we all felt that a great man had shared the morning with us. And on behalf of Seminole, Mr. McGee, I want to welcome you to our city, and I do want to make the presentation of the key to the city of Seminole, and it's our way of saying that we're glad you're here, and we welcome you back always.
Thank you very much. I have fond memories of Seminole, and I'll continue to have them.
Thank you. I do want to also further comment that, as Mr. McGee said, in the early days and even now, that the name Seminole is synonymous with oil, and it will, I hope, be forevermore. And I think that we in Seminole are proud of our oil heritage and our oil tradition. And the Seminole Historical Society has asked me to announce that today is the kickoff drive for the Oil Museum. And I don't believe there is another place in the United States in which an oil museum is more appropriate. As most of you know, during the height of the boom, the Seminole Field was producing more oil than the entire state of Oklahoma produces today. And we know that during the time of the boom, that many of the major oil companies participated with us in this boom, and we do hope that many of them will also participate in the museum. So again, I do want to thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Mayor. I have an announcement that I should have made earlier. We've been asked to announce that the Rotary Club will meet at the K-Rob Steakhouse next week. They will meet at K-Rob Steakhouse next week. I'm sorry I didn't make that earlier. Those of you who live around here will know, you will understand that John Steiger, in making his introductions up here, really didn't realize who was at the end of the table down here. He was stating dignitaries, and all of us know there's nothing dignified about either one of those, Baxter Hammonds or Cecil Sullivan. And matter of fact, they could, I'm sure Cecil could add quite a few stories concerning Bishop's Alley back in those days. We have a lot more today. We're only going to change locations for it. You know, the Gristle home will be open for your touring, and also we have another part of the program to be conducted down in the park. And we will ask Bill Snell, if he will, to come up and give us some details about how he's arranged for us to get there and the route to take and so on. Bill?
Thank you, Don. The Highway Patrol and the City Police that have cooperated with us so well will lead us from here down to the park where the monument will be unveiled. As you get in your vehicles, if you will wait before going out onto the highway until most everyone is in